call Konstantinos Zorbas, who is going to give us the keynote speech.
Είχα σκοπό να βγάλω το κινητό μου, αλλά μάλλον πρέπει να το κρύψω τώρα.
I was thinking of placing my mobile phone here on the podium, but I will hide it. Your Reverend Metropolitan of Kissamos, Amphilochios, a representative of His Holiness Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew, your Reverend Metropolitan of Glyfada Pavlos, Reverend heads of church, Your Holiness head of Vatopedi, Elder Ephraim, distinguished members of the Scientific and Organizing Committee, respected fathers, ladies and gentlemen, Christ has risen. Christ has risen. I would respectfully express our thanks for the decision to represent the Ecumenical Patriarchate in this first international conference on digital media and Orthodox pastoral care. I would also like to thank for the honor to express this discourse from the Orthodox Academy of Crete. The Orthodox Academy of Crete is a pioneering institution of the Church of Crete and of the Ecumenical Patriarchate. It ministers its services for the past 47 years, always serving the Patriarchate, the sciences and the whole Orthodoxy, a ministry that focuses on the urgent need to substantially study the issues of faith and science in order to promote the life of people. And because, dear guests, this first international event actually takes place in the place where we have the joint philosophy according to Plato's tradition, that is, where we can hold a discreet, free and open dialogue, an orthodox dialogue. This present speech is included within the framework of an open internet vis-a-vis an open church and vice versa. We know that the main feature of information society is that significant social changes take place during the lifetime of people, something that requires constant adjustment, thus requires adjustment by the pastoral care of church. So the question is that we run a risk. On the one hand, we think that nothing changes, that we are living same times, and on the other hand, we think that our times are unique. Are there new characteristics nowadays that allow us to talk about a post-industrial period or a post-modern period? The answer to that question cannot be just technological development or the entirety of some technological advances, because we don't know whether in 2 or 3 generations ahead of us there will be changes and developments that will lead us to change our views and consider that what we see today is of secondary importance. However, what in our view is quite important is something which is less tangible than technology. As we know, significant social changes up till now, since they would take place during the lifetime of many generations, would only minimally affect the individual life of each different person. That is, society would be static and stable. However, nowadays, the pace, the rate of changes has led us to see significant changes. Changes that oblige us to change our own behavior in our lifetime. This is the characteristic distinguishing element of our days. Let's see some of the characteristics of our society vis-à-vis the present and the future of the digital media. The first characteristic is the existence of many options. This is a consequence of the digital media nature. If fashion, the way of communication, spelling, etc., change every 10,000 years, then in every specific human life, they will remain almost constant and stable, and the relevant individual choices very few. When the pace of changes is accelerated, and from 10,000 years it becomes 1,000 or 1,100, then again the situation remains static. However, when from 100 years we go to 10 years time, then at the same time we have the coexistence of many ways of communication, coexistence of multiple individual and social habits. And this whole thing creates a new social situation, the society of multiple choices. However, I'm really afraid that citizens are not free to choose, to have their free choices. Architecture of the will and desire leads us to a battle amongst our choices, since companies control our behavior through digital media. In this way, cybernetic capitalism replaces the traditional freedom of choice with a confusing manipulation of our choices, as put by Nobel laureate Milton Friedman. Another characteristic of our society is the increase of human knowledge that has led to scientific specialization. What's new in our times is not that this specialization is in every science, that there can be no physicist, no doctor, nor IT expert who is knowledgeable on everything. Even at a daily rate, it is not possible for anyone to be aware of everything that's happening on a daily basis. The volume of this information leads to a new prioritization of principles from big pharma, big food, big oil. Today, we are found before a new technological concept of big data. With the term big data, we do not only refer to the current trend of IT and ICT technologies for processing and analysis of large quantities of information at real time. This term is the most significant financial source of the 21st century. Of course, as it is described by the American historian Elizabeth Eisenstein, what makes a difference in information is the volume, the velocity, and the variety. This has as a consequence another basic characteristic of today, which is the penetration of ICTs in every side of and aspect of our social, spiritual, financial, and political life. Before today, only a few people had to deal with a technology in their daily life that did not exist when they were born. This changes. The entire population, or almost the entire population, since we talk about electronic illiteracy, has to handle new technologies. Big data has penetrated the civil society. Users may create countless photographs, texts, etc. Sensors and modern watches measure the heart rate and analyze the chemical composition of sweat during exercise. Daily objects such as T-shirts or even artificial trees are able to analyze and interpret the wishes of citizens, or even go as far as predicting weather. Big data, however, means the rise of artificial intelligence. The truth is that the current developments of artificial intelligence invite us in the world of forms as well as in ideas and concepts such as the unification between the spirit and the body. The entrapment into a virtual society shapes the modern information era. And in the specialized technologies, active use does not pertain but to specialized professionals. Maybe advances in medical technology are not a job for every patient. However, technologies in information communication are pertinent for everyone. We are called to handle technologies that are contradicting because they did not exist in our environment as children. And it's not just technology itself that creates such conditions. There are essentially new elements in the mode of communication. So since the ease of learning is associated directly with what we got to know as children, it makes sense that senior citizens are not able to utilize efficiently all the available means of communication. However, we see that younger individuals are able to shape a new view on globalization, different from what already existed. Infrastructures become more and more accessible by young hackers, and it's not just viruses in computers and networks, but also industrial facilities or oil pumps or electricity stations and power stations that are the targets of the modern fundamentalistic criminals of cyberspace. I would like to further expand on the description of the typical data in this presentation. However, what I'd like to dwell upon is the way with which such data are expressed in society and the way with which an open orthodoxy could react on the basis of its principles. As Wellman observes, a studier and investigator in the cyberspace, the common denominator of studies around the area of the Internet is the creation of a separate optional virtual reality accessible to the average user. The imaginary or virtual network communities are composed by groups of people, communities of people, through their participation in electronic and digital communication networks. So it is particularly important to have in mind what the social anthropologist Benedict Anderson said. He said that such communities resemble imaginary communities that are linked to the political creation of such communities. We're talking about ephemeral communities with different imaginary identities. Users are set free from moral limitations and restrictions. The identity or the identities of users, such as gender, national identity, age, etc., have a character of masking and strategic nomadism. The intense phenomenon of friends and virtual friends further restricts people and limits them in a system of electronic gossip. of course, this to the benefit of private companies who, with the analysis of information, acquire competitiveness, improvement of innovative actions, new products and services. Thus, within a society of fatigue, there is the view shaped that a society without social networks is a society of loneliness. So within this new reality, the internet changes the experience of community and the feeling of identity. We have the production of new social or cultural schemes, either positive or negative. What is important, though, is that the concept of team and groups is violated through the use of masked identities, whereas this social grouping requires the metaphysic of real life. The physical presence is replaced by the presence, according to Paul Virilio, who says that the local time loses its significance before real-time communication. In our own humble opinion, if we were to identify some new elements that would create ethical dilemmas and questions with regard to the following are the following. The first one is that all big digital infrastructures lie in the hands of private bodies. It is very difficult and naive to believe that we can have a public investment in this sector. But who is able to safeguard personal data of users? This is a very complicated issue with many other consequent questions, such as how are the governments to react in the privatization of personal data of their own citizens? What are the new borders of privatization when the states that have access to personal data, particularly medical data, sell these data to private companies? Sensitive personal data of citizens, of every citizen, that once were a secret, nowadays with the leaks are made known to everyone and cannot become a secret again. Maybe you'll tell me that intervention and individual confidentiality, etc., could pertain to important events in the political life. But who will define who can intervene in the safe of our private life? And on the other hand, we have what most users say, that they have nothing to hide. We agree, but what we hide has to do with the past and not with the future. And what is particularly concerning today is not whether there will be a security and safety in a well-designed database vis-à-vis the secrets of the past, but rather the finding of a new identity oriented towards the future. Another element is the persistence of technology and the creation of a perfect perfection, without taking into consideration the important fact that the imperfection is a substantial characteristic of democracy, that is, of free people. Nowadays in Silicon Valley, we hear more and more the term of digital transformation in the name of a creative destruction of the planet.
In reality, however, it is a destruction of values. Digital metamorphosis requires a special perception of today's culture. Democracy is an obsolete technology. It brought wealth, health, and happiness to billions of people the world over. But now we want to try something new, and we have no other choice, says Randolph Henken. These and other declarations ignore the special quality of democracy as a social system, which is more than merely a digital engine. Such a digital transformation cannot be accepted as the understanding of the world when fundamental human rights are being violated by it. As says the Russian journalist Evgeny Morozov in his book To Save Everything, Click Here, in the near future, smart technologies and big data will allow us to intervene in politics, culture, and everyday life. Technology will allow us to solve problems with very original ways. But how such a solutionism can affect our society, politics, ethics, and education. The temptation of today's digital era to determine everything from crime to corruption, from pollution to obesity, but when we change the motives for a code of ethics and our political behavior, this may also change our very nature and its content. So very slowly but in a stable manner, again, we see analysis and actions taking into consideration the human being as a whole. The American Irving David Yalom, professor at Stanford University and a writer, recognizes that today in the digital era there are four basic existential anxieties: the certainty of death, loneliness, the freedom to shape our lives, and lack of meaning from them. So we are called, we're invited to answer as a society what constitutes progress. The studies described in the past something that has changed today. The religions can really change things offline. A critical revision of today's literature shows that the online religious practices are characterized by common features that we see in everyday life. What can a blogger have in common with God? We are given the answer by the blogger himself. He writes on the internet. The potential of the blogger today to be heard from the whole world is impressive. You can put a blog together only in a few minutes and free of charge, and then the sky is the limit. In every church, God is immortal, omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent, and charitable. Good technology turns us into gods. Take a blogger, for example. His words are forever alive online, and he's everywhere at the same time. Blogging abolishes boundaries. Blogging turns you into God. Here one could claim that we have something similar, the equivalent of the parable of the prodigal son. Let us see a little bit this parable from the side of the cyberspace. Who is the prodigal son? The parable begins with the movement by the child to the father, who asks for his share of the property. But what is this property? Not only the material one, because it is what the person is and what the person has equally. Maybe the digital media took away from us substantial values and that we had, and we created a society in the cyberspace which measures everything in numbers and products. In other words, with what the person has and not with what he is. Therefore, man today, because he's only interested in material wealth, has lost God. In fact, it is his substance that he is looking for. There is the embrace of the Father, but it is also the embrace shown to us by Christ during his life on earth. He remains open, especially when he is on the cross. And the evangelist Luke describes this in a very beautiful way. Father, forgive them, for they not know what they do. Amen, I tell you, on this day you shall be with me in paradise. These two phrases at the end show that Jesus will not withdraw into himself, but that he will remain open and continue to communicate. He doesn't require many words in order to communicate. In fact, Jesus uses his whole existence to communicate his stance and his silence. But the major means of communication for Jesus is his face. In other words, what Jesus reveals on the cross is how to remain open towards God and man. The cross is the secret of true communication. Eminence, Metropolitan of Kissamos and Selinos, Amphilochia, representative of His Holiness the Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew, let me say that what Gregory the theologian writes in his first theological discourse is very characteristic. He says that what is important is that people have advanced spiritually and have been purified. But, because there's always a but, Gregory says, if you want to delve in very fine matters such as the theology, in order to exercise your mind, then I shall suggest to you to advance on wide avenues. If by philosophizing on these subjects you find the truth, this is not useless. And if you err, it is not dangerous. And therefore, he says, if you achieve, if you succeed, this is not useless. If you err and if you fail, this is without danger. This is a very wise equilibrium. Throughout the 20th century, and even more so in the beginnings of the 21st century, Orthodoxy finds itself face to face with the challenges, the never seen before challenges of co-philosophizing, jointly philosophizing, which challenges invite the Orthodoxy to radically re-examine its identity. There is a need now for an encounter and dialogue between the Orthodoxy and the surrounding world. A second basic prerequisite which determines, according to the Holy Fathers, the relationship between theology and philosophy is the union between what is made and non-made, and I would say created and uncreated. Here I would remind of the model of the union of the two natures, that is the divine and the human nature in the person of Christ. Ασυγχύτως, ατρέπτως, αδιαιρέτως, αχωρίστως, according to the Fourth Ecumenical Synod. Here we must note that the way of this union is not only connected with the Orthodox Christology, but mutatis mutandis also finds an application here in this conference. So orthodoxy could become a source of knowledge, but not in the sense of a database, ready-made database, but orthodoxy could play a catalytic role in the society of information, if and when it becomes itself the safe forum for questions, a space where questions can be raised in a spirit of freedom and love. If we take the part that belongs to us in the revelation of the design of God, respecting, of course, the wisdom of the past, but also adding on to it. If we seek, the Orthodoxy seeks its lost revolutionary spirit of the message of the resurrection that it had during its first ages. To stop projecting sin as a sin to be evaluated and punished, and to project in action the church as collectivity and communion. And here the word of the ecumenical patriarch is again of actuality. He says that the future does not belong to the complacent individualist, to the person who only sees his self-reflection, who lives only for himself without recognizing in his neighbor a brother in Christ. In underlying this communion of persons, His Holiness notes that there is a deficit in communication which affects badly our relationships in the cyberspace. Uncommunicating life does not allow us to see in the other the apocalypse of truth in our own faces. Something that can be summarized in the words "in the image of God." Thank you very much for your attention.